Welcome back to the CAPISAR podcast, and I am Aswin Subramanyan. And in today's episode, we are going to dive deep into what it really takes to become a CAPISAR certified astrologer. So, joining me is astrologer Samuel Reynolds, who has been a very essential part of the astrological community, and his voice is no stranger. He does not need any introduction, but still, thanks, Samuel, for joining. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited about this podcast.
Thanks. So, um, so one thing is you have been very, very active in the astrological community, and you have never kind of shied away from being vocal about various issues, especially ethical issues or some other philosophical issues, and you've always put out your own take on that, and always stood by that, and never kind of afraid to say something publicly, which is something is very admirable. But also, you always kind of make sure that you stay within those ethical parameters of what an astrologer should follow. So, which is part of what we are going to discuss today. And CAP ESAR certification. So one thing is, let's begin with certification itself. Like I know we kind of spoke about this very shortly in our very first episode where we spoke with Sir Patrick Watson and Michelle Gould. But I think since we are actually talking about the CAPISAR certification as a specific episode, it will be good to hear from you as to whether certification is necessary for an astrologer, or does it kind of, what is your stand on that regarding certification in general?
So, I just for the audience, I am certified at various levels with two organizations. I'm completely certified with ESAR as a CAP certified astrological professional, and then I am certified up to level 3 with NCGR. I haven't done their level 4 yet, but I did. Early in my career, I did the first 3 levels in the early 2000s. To answer your question directly, I do not think it is necessary for an astrologer to be certified, but I do think it's advisable. And the reason why I think it's advisable is very specific. It's more so a lot of us are autodidacts. We've kind of learned on our own, or maybe we've had sundry teachers. And what I've come to recognize, and this is something that was brought home through my first series of examinations through NCGR, and then definitely as I went through ESAR's process, I realized we don't know what we don't know. Yeah. And this, I have to credit an NCGR professional who I went to learn rectification. And this is before I started taking those exams. In fact, it's the reason why I started taking those exams. I had called him up because I had gotten his number. I was in New York City, and in New York, the New York chapter would issue out a nice pamphlet and have the names and numbers of different professionals you can consult or learn from. So I reached out to Julian Armistead, who's no longer with us in New York. And I was like, I want to learn rectification. Now, he was kind of crotchety in a, vintage kind of way. Because when we were trying to arrange everything, he said, young man, I don't hear any papers rustling in the background there where you're consulting your ephemeris. In terms of the timing. And I was like, oh my God. Okay, yeah, sure. I just wanted to figure out related to my schedule. I'm still sort of like that, but I guess he wanted to elect the time that we would meet. And so I ended up meeting with him, and then I said, I want to learn rectification. And then he started asking me very pointed questions, sensible questions related to how do you rectify? Like, well, do you know progressions? Do you know these? Blah, blah, blah. All these particular things. Well, I didn't know those things. And he said, well, I don't know what you don't know. And that really, it annoyed me at first. But as I thought about it, I was like, I think he's right. I don't even know what I don't know. And so that's when I enrolled in the the programs with the exams and going with level 1, level 2, and level 3. And it really was eye-opening because I realized there's a lot I didn't know. I didn't know about Uranian astrology, didn't know as much about Vedic astrology. And for NCGR, you have to know those particular things. And you have to know how to create a chart by hand. Now, some of
Brilliant.
that we can talk about related to the CAPISAR exam, because some of that is also there, but it's a different intention, and it's not over 3 exams. The competency exam is 5-6 hours long. It's like the SAT of
Yeah.
of for the United States college entrance exams. It's like a college entrance exam. So that's why I say it's not necessary, but it will be instructive and advised, because then you can be sure you're rounding out your astrological knowledge, because we can get in our various silos and we
Yeah.
don't know, particular things.
Yeah, excellent. I think one of those points that you mentioned is it kind of stayed with me throughout this past 2-3 minutes. Like, we don't know what we don't know. So unless we expose ourselves to some form of test, we really kind of end up assuming that we know a lot of things. But only when we kind of expose ourselves to a testable platform, we kind of understand where we stand, and that is pretty much important for all the astrologers, especially when astrology is still a very unregulated field where certification is not really common. I think certification turns out to be one of those important factors, because of the fact that still a professional astrologer is somewhere a respected profession, and it is always good to kind of have in our resumes that we are certified by so and so group or so and so astrologer or something like that. So at least from that perspective, do you think there is some form of a validation that an astrologer gets, which kind of not only gives them confidence but also gives some form of confidence to the clients when they actually go through the profile of an astrologer?
Yes, I think 2 things related to that. One, in terms of, and I'm more client centered,
Mm.
in that sense. I think it can be a boon for a client who's attentive to such things. Meaning, the client who wants to see a paper trail for, who has this person studied with, how have they studied, how do we know what they know. I think that is kind of the more astute client, and we all would love to see more clients like that. But the population isn't always that astute, right?
Yeah.
They will go with, well, who resonates with me? And I like his videos, or she's cute, or I like the things that they say, And I'm not saying people are silly or stupid, but they're not necessarily always discerning.
Yeah.
And they're not thinking about, you don't know this person. This person might sound, very sagacious, but you don't know who they've studied with. You don't know if
Yeah.
they've studied. They may have read 2 books on astrology and then start talking about it. The other issue is, and I know this is very different than the practice in India, which is what I revere to some degree, that there's a living tradition, that things are kind of passed along and discussed and said. Now, why I'm making that a big point, because I'm not poo-pooing on, Western, quote unquote, Western astrology. But why I think that's significant is that sometimes when we're autodidacts and learning on our own, there's some ways in which we don't catch the nuances or even the sound of things. I once watched a YouTube astrologer who was talking about, he kept using this word. He was like, well, there's a trine between Mercury and Neptune. And for a minute, I was like, what is he talking about? A trine? Then it hit me. He means trine. And that's because he's never heard the word.
Mm.
And I think that becomes important. And if he had studied live with someone, he
Correct.
might have connected that the word is pronounced trine.
Yeah.
That's a very small example. I mean, otherwise, maybe I think he was a reasonably competent astrologer. I even hired him at some point, not for me, but for a particular event I put together. But, I talked with him about that. And I think it does become important for the community, both in terms of other astrologers and then, as you mentioned, the clientele, to be
Yeah.
educated about how the astrologer has been educated
Yeah.
or what they are competent in doing.
Sure. So, because just like every other field, there is a lot of specializations in astrology as well. So, certifications kind of play a major role from that perspective. So, uh, what is the demand before we get into the CAPISAR specific thing? Do you think the demand among the younger astrologers to kind of do the certification is increasing because uh, before the the 2000s, it was not very common for people to kind of take some courses with people, primarily because of the fact that internet was not very common. But now internet is very common and people can kind of access astrology as easy from their mobiles. So, and they kind of scroll down social media and everyone knows everyone today. And people like yourself and other important astrologers are very active on social media, and you all teach courses, and people watch that. People watch your work, they listen to your lectures and then come back and take your consultations, and then after that they also come and take your courses, which is kind of a although it might not be necessarily an org certified course, but it still is some form of a certification, and people kind of get into a lineage as soon as they join an astrologer and take their courses for 1-2 years or something like that. So I think the demand is growing, but do you think it is growing, and do you think it is for a it is a positive trend or something like that?
Yes and no. So let me
Okay.
talk about the nuances of the yes and the nuances of the no.
Mm.
In terms of it growing, I think, especially since we can see an accelerated growth since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
All of us had to go online. Um, there may have been some astrology, a good number of astrologers who either were doing it in community or doing it solo, offering classes in person, but for a time we all had to go online. And also more conferences, more different webinars kind of ballooned.
Yeah.
What that allowed it allowed it to happen was to bring in an influx of people who, for whatever reason, weren't as exposed to astrology. And also we had a good number of people who had time,
Mm.
had downtime. And so I think there was this explosion in terms of people having an interest and then going to various astrologers along that line of lineage that you're talking about,
Right.
for it to become an astrologer. The downside to that, and just to kind of, shameless plug, but I think it's informative here too. I am the president of a newly formed organization called the International Coalition for Astrology Educators. And our goal is to kind of foster quality competencies in education for astrologers and astrology, and then be able to share those competencies between organizations, between educators of various stripes. I'll go into that a little later, but essentially what happened with that explosion and this growth that you're alluding to is that now we have a good number of astrologers or young astrologers or interested or enthusiasts who are studying, like either with me or studying with Chris Brennan or studying with Adam Ellenboss, or studying with you or whoever. the problem is they may get diplomas or certifications from these respective, now I don't give them, but from these respective teachers or institutions, but they don't necessarily translate or transfer with other institutions. You can get something like you study with Nightlight Astrology with Adam Ellenboss, and you get a certification from him, but that may not count for much if you kind of go to Kepler.
Correct.
Or if you kind of go to another school. And that's a pity. There should be a way, and this is what my organization is seeking to do, to kind of foster that kind of transmission and transferability between these various institutions and educators. So that's one.
Mm.
The other dimension of it is that, yeah, we can give certifications and diplomas, but does it necessarily testify to competency? And this is where I can tie in related to CAPISAR or NCGR. And yes, you have to, have X number of electives or courses that you take, but do the competencies then translate, or, taking the exam, is that the same as having competency? Because exams, even at 6 hours or even at 3 levels, they don't necessarily measure the full swath of things, and especially since the examiners may have their own biases. So for instance, I know CAPISAR probably is going to redo their exam, and NCGR probably is going to be doing the same. But these two institutions, as an example, largely are informed by 20th century modern astrology. So when I talk about, well, yeah, I'm looking at, delineate something related to Aquarius, and I start talking about Saturn, somebody might be upset, like, well, you didn't mention Uranus. I'm never going to mention Uranus, right? Because I don't ascribe or subscribe to that rulership schema, as an example. Right. And people have, historically, I don't know if it's still happening, been penalized for not talking a certain way. And I do make a distinction between 20th century astrology and 21st century astrology, because I think there's been an influx of so much, whether we're talking about Hellenistic, whether we're talking about Islamic, whether we're talking about Vedic, there's been such an influx of different tributaries into astrology now that it is very different in a lot of ways from 20th century astrologies. Now, that has implication for 20th century organizations like ISAR, now CAPISAR. It has implications for, some of the teachers. And so we don't have a way to really have a collective discussion on competency. The other point I would make, I'm a CAP-ISAR, I'm a CAP through ISAR. I mean, before it was CAP-ISAR. But it doesn't count toward anything with NCGR. It won't count for anything. I mean, I think some of it does count toward OPA. It doesn't count toward anything with AFA and their certifications. But we're all astrology organizations.
Yeah.
So why can't we have some transferability? So to answer your question, I think we do have more people perhaps seeking different levels of competency with individual instructors and taking classes either through CAP, with ISAR or whatever. But there's no coordinated evaluation or coordinated evaluation of competencies between educators and institutions at all.
Yeah, I think that's where the affiliated schools kind of come in.
Only for ISAR, right? In the sense that, in this is where, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history behind that for a second.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why my organization was formed is I would just, full discretion and disclosure, I was on the board that formulated this, but I didn't vote for it. So what was voted on is that schools, affiliated schools, and again, this is not in practice now, but I do want to make that clear so no one's confused. But It was in practice, I think 2021, 22, 23, until this board got rid of it. But what was involved was that affiliated schools would pay $1,000 over 2 years to remain as affiliated schools and receive particular perks like being on the ESAR website, being able to speak at conferences, being eligible for scholarships for their students, things like that, to go to conferences. Now, during that time, there wasn't a conference up until 22 at ESAR. Then shortly after that, because of some internal problems with ESAR, the website went down. So all those particular schools that subscribed, to that program, and I was the head of a college that did not, the International Academy of Astrology, they didn't get that benefit. My organization surfaced because we took strong issue with that pay to play schema for affiliated schools. Again, ESAR's gotten rid of it, to be fair, but the problem still remains. Not in the sense that these schools are paying or anything like that, but the problem remains in that you become an affiliated school with ESAR. What's the benefit related to NCGR or the coordination between, like, my students taking the ESAR exam and then taking the NCGR exam, and there's no cross fertilization at all? Right. What is it doing for my students?
Yeah, so the transferability is one of those things that we need to address universally.
Yeah, so we do. Yeah, and so it would be even nice to be able to do it related to, the schooling and things that you've gone through in India. But the truth is, with all the schooling and the rigor, because I told you I've been in India, I've studied some Vedic astrology. The rigor that you go through or have gone through as a PhD doesn't even mean as much related to ESAR or related to, or the school that you went to related to NCGR. But these are international organizations. So I think we have to figure that out. And because I think there's some unfairness. So yeah, people are they're studying with Chris Brennan, they're studying with Adam, they're studying with, I'm trying to think of Kelly Surtees. But we're all siloed and we're not building an education spectrum. And that's what my organization hopes to do. But, we're not the only one. We're not saying that it should just be us. But anyway.
Right. Yeah. So that seems to be an area of, something that we need to address. So moving on to the CAPISAR certification itself. So you have taken the CAPISAR certification. And part of the reason why you are here is because you're one of those prominent astrologers who have actually finished, and you're a certified astrological professional. So to start with, the CAPISAR website itself says that the percentage of people passing at the first attempt is actually very, very low. So which means that there needs to be some kind of a strategy to kind of approach the exam or prepare for the exam, and also to kind of appear, because it looks like, since you already mentioned that the competency exam itself is like 5 to 6 hours of examination, and it needs a lot of physical, mental, and also intellectual capabilities to just sit there and endure that and finish it successfully. So to begin with, how did you kind of approach this, and what were some of the strategies that you used to clear this out? I'm asking this because CAPISAR itself mentions on their website that the pass percentage at their first attempt is very low. So maybe if we address this or kind of throw some light into the approach and preparation, it might be easier for those who enroll in the future.
Yes. Although I'm going to put some onus on CAPISAR because I don't know if they've done it. The onus I'll put is when ESAR, and I took it when it was just ESAR at the time. CAPISAR didn't quite exist. And one of the problems, as distinct from NCGR, is that CAPISAR or ESAR didn't have a prep guide. Now, NCGR does have a study guide for their exams, which I think was very helpful. That didn't really exist for CAPISAR. Ann Ortley, who also has taken the exam, Ann Ortley is one of the other astrologers who actually is certified completely with 3 different organizations, with CAPISAR or in ESAR, with AFA and NCGR. So she's taken all 3. So she might be another person to interview for the show. But she formulated a little study guide, and then offered a class. I just went once, but and to be honest, because I knew some dimension of it, I was fine. When I say dimension, I knew some of the topics, by virtue of being on the board. I did not know any of the questions. I had no leg up related to that, but I did know some of the topics or what to be covered. But that wasn't organized in a certain way of like, well, what to focus on or what recommended resources can one consult. All those particular things weren't present. So that would be helpful for CAPISAR to do if it hasn't already done it. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that there's been a lot going on, and there are specific people who are on the board, CAPISAR board. There are specific people who are handling different areas of the exam itself. So I have, my knowledge about direct examination is very less because I've not taken it myself. But overall, CAPISAR over the past 1 year, the board has kind of put in a lot of effort, especially in terms of bringing everything together, and in terms of certification exams, they have done a lot of work, and things are slowly kind of up to the mark. But I think there needs to be still, some form of information that needs to be put out for the benefit of those people who are going to take it.
Yeah.
But I can assure that at this point, CAPISAR is pretty much a cleaned up organization, and we are ready to go on. One of the reasons, this podcast is now a reality is a testimony to the fact that CAPISAR is now ready to fly. So that's something that those people from the board itself can come and talk. People like Lars Mellis or someone like that who is directly involved with the certification programs, and they can come and clarify on that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I see that, and it makes sense. So I'm not implicating current CAPISAR or the board, but it's just that was something I did not have. Now, in terms of how I decided to prepare for the exam as I took it, I guess 7 years ago, my recommendations, it's an open book exam. Do not think that's easy. In fact, study more, be familiar more with those texts rather than relying on those texts during the exam, because you can take those books, but just looking through them, looking up things, will take and eat up more time during the exam. So that would be one recommendation. Do not go in order. Some people think like I'm going to start from, the beginning and then all the way through. You likely may not finish. What I would say is answer the open-ended questions, the ones that require you writing out things first, so that you can, get those, you have enough time, enough meat of time to answer those. And then you can answer more of the multiple choice questions, even if you kind of just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, if you don't know them at all. Because then that can go faster. Because what you won't have time for is that if you have spent more of your time with the multiple choice questions, which is, the exams are different each time. I mean, even different venues, you'll get a different exam, and also they're available in different languages. And so you're not going to take the same exam as someone else might have.
Yeah.
So that was something that was in play, even, like I said, 7 years ago, and maybe even now that's even more improved. There's more exams, or versions of the exam. And so if you kind of just go through and answer the multiple choice first, or those questions, true and false, they're also true and false questions. When you get to the point where you have the open-ended answers that require more, interpretation and whatever, you're going to rush through it. And those are actually graded higher. And when I say graded higher, they're worth more points.
Mm.
And so someone's going to be looking at that to see at your level of interpretation.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes important to go in with that kind of strategy. You do not need to demonstrate that you can construct a chart from scratch, but you will need to know how to construct a chart from scratch.
Yeah.
Meaning you won't need to do it like you have to do with the NCGR exam, but you're going to get those questions. So you should study, how do I do a chart by hand? Then you also need to understand some measure of the astronomy, fixed stars, various forms of astrology. And when I say forms, I mean more the schools of thought, the Hanbok school, Vedic astrology. I don't know if there's any Mesoamerican astrology, but more so understanding psychological astrology. So there's a more of a complete swath that you need to have related to your education, rather than like, why study Hellenistic astrology? That's cool, but the exam is not just going to be Hellenistic astrology.
Right.
And then you need to be familiar with the branches of astrology and distinct from it, so horary, electional, astrocartography, natal is actually a branch. It's not its own,
Yeah.
and elements of predictive astrology. What's the solar arc direction? So those are the things that I would say, this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give someone some idea, like you have to go in, having really immersed yourself in the worlds of astrology.
Yeah. So somewhere like there is a lot of preparation time that's necessary because the candidate has to kind of complete a lot of components that requires a lot of writing and also some objective questions that they need to answer, and to kind of manage the time between all these aspects will be a challenge. And maybe some form of a mock scenario or something like that would be beneficial. But sorry, but just after kind of enrolling and looking at what someone has to go through, it might be a surprise or even a shock for some people, thinking that they actually knew a lot of astrology. Maybe they've been studying or practicing for 10-15 years, and suddenly they go there. It's really challenging, and suddenly they find out that there is a lot that they have to uncover and maybe sit and study some texts. So it is not uh, feasible to kind of ask you how long will it take for an astrologer to prepare for this course, because it depends on a particular astrologer's exposure and skill level. Maybe someone who has studied a lot of texts and is familiar with a lot of uh, those techniques that is part of CAPISAR's testing process, they might be able to kind of get through soon. But for someone like me who comes from a Vedic background, it might be a little challenging or difficult. So when you prepared, or when you kind of decided to take this, what was your own mindset, and how did you approach from preparation point of view, not necessarily from appearing perspective?
So most astrology books, I'm not saying all, but most of them are very interpretive heavy, especially, the books of Liz Green, And, we could say, I know you're someone who's worked with Anthony Lewis for a while. And, you know, I think his books are great, whether it's horary astrology or his solar return books. But I would say, I would encourage people to focus more on the mechanics and details. And I'll explain what I mean by details of astrology. So one very good book by Luis Ribeiro and his former partner, who's passed away, Helena Evelar, on the heavenly spheres, would be a great book to start with. Why? Not just because it's traditional, but it it lays out what are the mechanics and the understandings related of astrology. Go back to the basics rather than just sticking with you think you know, right? Go back to like, well, for instance, can you answer, why are the signs in the order that they're in? Why do we have these rulerships associated with them? Hint, hint, it's not anything to do with affinity. What is primary motion? What is secondary motion? Think more technical rather than just interpretation. If you've been in practice for a while as an astrologer, you might, it might be helpful to rely on Sue Thompson's book on aspects and review what a Mars-Saturn opposition might look like. But chances are you also know what a Mars-Saturn opposition is and can talk about it. What you may not know is like, well, what happens to Mars when he's at a certain declination? Do you know what declination is?
Yeah.
Right? So it's more so getting into what is the astronomy, what are the technical other aspects of astrology that inform what astrology is. And that's where I think most 20th century modern astrologers are sorely lacking, that this exam will bring to light.
Right.
So, for instance, like, well, is the zenith the same as the midheaven? No. But, they may think, well, yeah, they're not the same. So you have to be more familiar with the technicalities of understanding the workings of a chart rather than, and then some of the ideas related to it rather than just, just all the interpretation. The interpretation comes from, yes, the study, but also the practice. So if you've been in practice diligently, it could work. Now, I do want to answer a question. You framed it a certain way. What's the time frame of study?
Yeah.
I have seen newly minted young astrologers come in, many of them who know more astrology in detail, like what I was just talking about, than some folks who've been studying for 20 years. And some of that is because they have access to more information than I think previous generations. So for instance, I know some folks, I'm not one of them, but who will listen to Chris Brennan's 9-hour podcasts, right?
Yeah.
And religiously.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe, the vintage astrologer or more the 20th century astrologer, they only got to see a lecture, once a month, and that was for 2 hours. So there's some people who are subsisting on a diet of astrology that goes almost 18 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. So, that person could be, learning at an accelerated rate because they can. There's more information out there. Like, well, what about we vintage astrologers, as you frame us, Sam? Well, I think it's to look at what's on the market, not just what's on the web. Something that I lament is that people aren't reading books anymore as much. They're relying on YouTube videos. They're relying on web pages. There are things, Instagrams, yeah. And, I do them, but I also have books, right?
Yeah.
I also get books. And there are things that are in books you're not going to find on the web.
Correct.
And I think that, like, so for instance, I got to put a plug in for you. Your Fedaria book, right? And breaking down and interjecting the notes,
Yeah.
which is not, it is in the practice, but the nodes throughout all the different Fadars, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to find that on the web, right? I hope
Mm.
hope it never gets there, so people keep buying your books. But that becomes important in understanding, like, what is the Fadar, you
Mm.
know? That could be on the exam. So I think even if you kind of just buy Kindle books or get them on loan, because that's something you can do, go to the library, start using your library, requesting books that you find on the web,
Yeah.
um, go to bookstores. When you go to a conference like NORWAC, there's a whole, or you go to a conference like UAC, there's going to be a whole big selection of books that you can look through and then kind of, you know, save up for, or share with friends or whatever.
Right. So, so one of those things is the exposure or the access that an astrologer has to the materials, as opposed to those who don't have. But on the other hand, the like you mentioned, the difference of modern day or younger generation of astrologers who are more inclined towards watching or listening than reading, which might be a different ball game, or maybe there is some form of change that they need to make if they need to, be if they want to be serious about this CAPISAR exam or something like that, because there is not much information that they're going to find on YouTube videos or Instagram reels that will help them crack these exams fully. I'm not saying nothing is available. There's good astrology available. There are a lot of good sources, but still, I think books will end up being one of the most important sources for astrologers to kind of learn and grow. So, moving on, like competency exam, like you mentioned in terms of preparation and all those things. But and you also spoke about which one to go first, and like interpretive parts or writing, and then moving on to the objective parts, which don't take much time because we know a lot of things and we can just finish it off as soon as possible. But apart from this, like, what are the things that people need to kind of focus on while they go in, so that they don't be surprised when it is a 6 hour marathon that they need to kind of sit? So some things that they can keep in mind and probably have a strategy beforehand.
Well, I don't remember all the topics that were,
Yeah, no,
because
not in terms of topics, but in terms of uh, you know uh, the topic is obviously astrology, and that's broad. But my question is related from a psychological perspective, to sit
oh,
there and yeah.
how to
That's-
psychologically prepare.
yeah, because I don't
Well,
know if anyone is
well,
as
physically
yeah.
prepare. Well, there's a couple things to know. So, physically prepare, get a good night's sleep some nights before. Um, be regular in your studies. When I say regular in your studies, this is where you benefit from having a schedule rather than trying to cram. Um, so maybe a month, 2 months before, you commit to 2, 3 hours a day of study. And then, before the exam, or at least 2 nights or so before the exam, it's much more restful. So you're not stressed. The other thing to know, technically the exam is 7 hours where you get an hour break. So you do get time for lunch.
True.
Um, so you get some time for lunch. You can, regroup or whatever. I did that. I remember, because it was downtown Manhattan, and I went to some place I had picked out for lunch. So know where you also want to go for lunch. You might want to scope out the location. I don't know if CAPISAR is going to keep it in person or do it online, but that's the other thing to kind of, figure out. Psychologically,
Well, the online is available, I think so.
okay. Psychologically, I would say, especially if you've been in practice, know that, your practice, this is kind of like this is not going to be the merit to make or break you as an astrologer, but as much as I invite you to look at it as kind of, you know, an opportunity to show what you know, and then also at the same time reveal what you haven't paid enough attention to. Now, in preparation, you want to avoid the latter as much as possible. You know, the lack of what you've been exposed to. But I remember when in taking the exam, I was also reflecting on, as I was taking the exam, on, you know, understanding astrology, the perspective of the examiners. And while I'm saying that, I knew that many of them, even though I may have known some of the folks, were also 20th century. And you're like, well, how do you know that? Some of the way they framed the questions, you know, and I think that means studying some history of astrology. You know, one book I might recommend is James Holden's book, History of Horoscopic Astrology, as an example. And then there are other books, but where you understand how things have developed over time. And then you can see, even with the exam, it becomes almost an interesting intellectual exercise. Like, oh, I know why they're asking that question that way because of this. And it can be a lot more entertaining. This is why I'm saying, you know, yes, you can bring your books, but do not plan on relying on them much. You might take a quote, and you can, you know, especially if you want to mention a particular part, you know, during your written part, or you want to vouch for something. But you do want to take more of the technical historical books, you know, kind of like, well, I want to take Liz Green's Anatomy of Fate, you know, what she says about Pluto. If you don't know it, it's not going to help you, because you're going to be thumbing through and trying to find, and then like put in your
That's a
own
good
words.
point.
Right. Take the technical books with you. Take the, you know, Encyclopedia of Astrology with you. Take and know that book. Have looked through that book. Take the Dictionary of Astrology with you, you know, and look through that book. Look at the entries of that book and be familiar with understanding the principles of esoteric astrology or things like that. It will be helpful to kind of, and I don't know if that answers the mindset, but the mindset, well, I'll say one thing. I mean, a Mars in Capricorn, so this is kind of, you know, maybe it's unique to me or other Mars in Capricorns. I look at every exam as a battle. I always have, right? So I looked at, am I prepared for the battle? And, you know, create some exam questions for yourself. Like what might someone ask you that you're weak on? Like, I can think of that right now. I don't know jack whatever about Huber, you know, the Huber scales or cosmodines. I don't know anything about them still. So I would have to look that up if I were going to take an exam. Like, oh, maybe I need to learn more about cosmodines. Right? It's more vintage. It's probably something you find more in a book. You're not going to find online. So, you know, what could you be quizzed on? You know, that, or you can ask your astrology friends, astrologer friends, you know, like, hit me with some questions. Ask me if I can, you know, talk about what are the triplicities, you know, and how fast you can do it. I'll tell you one funny story related to the challenges of certification and being ready for the NCGR exam. When we had to learn how to construct a chart by hand, I'll never forget. And I think it requires some humility. Maybe that's what also, and I'll talk about what that means in a second. There was an astrologer who I got to know who was taking that exam or preparing for that exam. We were learning how to construct a chart. And at the time, he would provide his clients with like a book, you know, printing out, you know, from, you know, things he found on the web, or, you know, I guess even a program he had. He would give them a book of printing out, you know, more about their astrology. and he would charge about $300 for that, which in the early 2000s, that probably be comparable to $600 now.
Hmm.
And I thought that was like, wow, he must really know his stuff, and to be able to do that. And well, we had an awkward moment where we were, constructing the charts by hand, and he said, "Hey, what's the opposite to Aries?" And I just looked at him because I'm that kind of guy. I just looked at him, like thinking like, well, maybe he's having a brain fart and it's just not coming to him what that is. And he's like, "No, seriously, what's the opposite to Aries?" And I think I squinted at him because I was like, "Is this real?" And I was like, "It's real. He's charging $300 and he doesn't know Libra. Interesting. Libra. Oh, thanks." And I was like, wow, Goonie Google, he doesn't even know the basics on some level. Good luck. But he was learning how to do that. I think review the basics. When I say humility, I think it goes in, you don't know what you don't know. Start with the idea maybe you know nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Uh, makes us ready for a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I think this is probably the right time for us to kind of shift the conversation towards consulting skills. Uh, Written examinations, intellectuality, technicalities are always there, but consulting skills is primarily what we do for the better part of our life and also for our living as astrologers. And that is one of those core skills that anyone needs to develop. So for CAPISAR, obviously they take all these, the nitty gritty technicalities from a astrologer's perspective in terms of how they do consultations and what are the ethical boundaries that they're kind of following. And and CAPISAR tests that, and which is very important. And what are the things that people need to remember or kind of follow? Especially, this is even more important for those people who just studied astrology but never kind of actually got into a consultation session. And it might also be very important and also eye-opening for some astrologers who have been doing sessions for a very long time. So obviously, there is a lot for everyone to learn.
I agree. One thing, you may be very surprised by this. So one thing that I find surprising, there are people who study astrology who've never had a consultation with an astrologer. And then one time when we had Michael Luton with us and he would gather astrologers, one time I was in a room full of some of the most notable astrologers in the world. I won't name names, but they are well known and you would know their names. And I asked them, I was like, when was the last time any of you had a consult with an astrologer? And none of them mentioned having a consult. They said, well, sometimes I talk with my friends about the astrology, but I haven't had a consult. And that was shocking to me as someone who started off with a consult with an astrologer, which set me flowing because I was a skeptic and I was like, how can he do this? This is BS. So I still get consultations from astrologers. You know one. I'm not shy about saying I got a consultation this year from Jolie Knott.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe in it. Now, to that point, if we don't get consultations, and we just rely on how we think they go, we may not be doing enough justice to our clients. And CAPISAR, starting with ESAR, creating consulting skills, created a 2.5-day program to, help people consult and talk through and be monitored and get feedback on how we talk about astrology. So there are tools that are given without it being heavy-handed toward one particular school of thought. Like Is it Jungian? Is it Freudian? Is it, CBT? Is it, it's much more, it was developed in tandem with therapists, and people who had therapeutic background, seasoned astrologers. And it's not so much just this is how you do it, but to give you feedback so that you can consult with a lot more awareness, consideration, and primacy related to the client.
So, how does it happen in a
So,
CAPISAR setup?
so from what I remember, because I did it some years ago, right?
Yeah, no
When I say
problem.
2.5 days, the first day is a half day. So it may be only 3 hours. The next 2 days, I think are maybe 6 or 7 hours. And then it's more a workshop style. And then you also at times will be broken into groups, like you're given particular tasks, then you can reverse, and then you meet together as a group again, and you talk it out, and what you discovered. I think there's also some classroom aspect of it where the facilitator will kind of talk about, this is this particular situation. This is how you talk about this particular situation. So,
Right.
that's kind of more from what I remember with the consulting skills. I've conducted more ethics awareness training, and
Yeah,
that's
I
more
think
fresh
you're
in my
also part
mind.
of. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about ethics.
Okay.
Because this episode is more of an experience of someone who has taken all this, but we'll be having specific sessions on each of this with those who are actually dealing with it. So let's move on to ethics. So I think that is also one of your areas of interest.
Yeah,
So
you and I had a very vibrant discussion on your Facebook page about ethical
very
situations.
recently.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is it about ethics examination in CAPISAR?
So to be clear, and I love this distinction from CAPISAR. It's ethics awareness training, because the idea is to make you aware of your ethics and
All right.
make you aware of the possibility of ethics in your astrology. It is not perforce telling you what your ethics should be. Now, it is stating, to be clear, what are the ethics that astrologers have agreed upon with ISAR, and you go through that. But
Yeah.
you may not agree with them. I'll give a very simple example. And I helped formulate this latest iteration of
Mhm.
ethics. So one particular stipulation that ISAR abides by is that you should have permission from someone who is involved in the reading. Let's say you're asking about your husband. You should have written permission or permission from your husband to talk about his chart.
Mm.
So that is something that is in our ethics document.
Right. Yeah, it's very important. We just can't kind of slap someone's chart.
Although, yeah, but I do. So, but here's what this is why I like it as ethics awareness. I will talk with a wife about her husband. Okay. If she has his chart, but I will only talk about it in relation to the two of them.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's an
Now,
important distinction.
right. So if she starts asking me like, well, do you think he has some money, stored away in Zurich? I don't know. It's none of your business, actually,
Yeah.
technically.
Sure.
Like if you, I can talk about, are you open with each other, your compatibility, but am I going to go more into his personal life? Like, why doesn't he talk to his mother? He never talks about his mother. Okay. That's where I would need his presence.
Yeah.
Um,
There are lines that we need to draw.
so, and I think that's kind of the importance of it.
Yeah.
So for instance, yeah, do you have relationships with your clients, like romantic relationships? That's clearly drawn out. in the ethics document. So that's something one discusses in ethics awareness training.
Yeah.
Some people well, it was after the session, and when I hit on her, it wasn't a problem. That's an ethics problem, right? Um, One of the things that we talk about now in the ethics document are power dynamics.
Right.
That was a revision that we came up with Tara All and Michelle Gould and me and why am I blanking on one other person? She's not going to forgive me, but yes, but yeah, you know, um, yeah, that we came up with this ethics idea, so that comes into play when we're at conferences. Like, well, we're all adults here. No, you're a speaker. You're a
Hmm.
speaker, and so there's a different power dynamic that's at play than you just being an adult and being, like, yeah, we're just at the bar together. That's
Yeah.
that's not the same. And so the ethics awareness document is more so to have astrologers aware of the importance of what we do and how we do it, and then drawing in some dimension of consulting skills, how we talk about it with others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Being aware of the ethics, so it's very important. And I think there were also scenarios where there were publicly drawn lines when it comes to astrologers who may have crossed a line or two. So so I think CAPISAR ethics awareness test basically kind of makes people aware of what they need to be aware of in terms of strict lines. There are some not necessary. I mean, every line is there for us not to cross. But like you mentioned now, the distinctions, like you will talk about a husband to a wife from a relational perspective, but not necessarily a personal thing. So but on the other hand, there are things that we cannot talk about. For example, you don't answer a question that a client does not ask,
Right.
and put them into a confusion, because an astrological session is meant to be supportive and to give clarity. It doesn't mean we should lie, but we need not say something that was not necessarily asked by a client, that's completely unrelated, or maybe talking about death, or being very definitive about some major calamity in a person's life without. Yeah, so some of those things.
Well, it's interesting you're asking that, and I'll tell you why it's interesting, right? Because it's definitely drawing upon more a European Western lens. Now,
Yeah.
I've had readings in India, right?
Oh, it's a different story.
Right. So in India, you sit down in an astrologer's chair. He might tell you when you might die, how
Yeah.
you might die, who's
Yeah.
gonna die in your family. You might
Mm.
die before your wife. Your wife's gonna die before you. These
Yeah,
things may come up.
sure, it
Um,
still does.
yes, I know.
But
Um,
I'll tell you something later on, but you can carry on now.
yeah. But I think we have to, pay attention to the culture that we are in, and I think that becomes important. Where, like you said, you don't volunteer particular information, um, for a lot of different ethical reasons. But yeah, that's all I wanted to point out. I wouldn't, and to be clear, I'm not saying that you have this practice or would do it, or if I would be critical of it for you in Tamil Nadu to do it. I mean, I think it's a different context and expectation than it
Right.
is here.
Yeah.
But
What I
anyway,
was about to say, this might be a little surprising for a lot of people. In modern India, um, death is not, still, death is not a topic of fear or taboo like it is in the West. It's pretty much accepted. And people come and ask when, if someone is reeling or suffering from a major health challenge or something, people just come and ask openly. So that, in that scenario, maybe the line of ethics might be a little blurry, but just openly kind of going and showing off that okay, you're going to die on so and so date or something like that would be outrageous. But even in India, I know I received an email before 1 month from a young lady in Tamil Nadu saying that someone, an astrologer, had said that her married life would be very bad and her husband would be dying within 2 or 3 years of their marriage. And she was kind of horrified. And she sent an email, and I had to clarify a lot of things to her. And it's not that people are not open to it or they are open to it, but it is very contextual in India. Even in India, people are kind of finding it a little offensive when astrologers say some sort of things like that. Especially in modern India, where people are very open to mental health and psychological aspects, people are really kind of finding it uncomfortable when an astrologer goes off and directly they show off their skills and say outrageous things that are not being asked. And especially when it comes to life and death scenario, it is sensitive, and anyone who knows when they'll die is it's not easy for them to kind of live in the future. So it India is not always what people perceive it to be. It's always very different, and people might
Sure.
find it very surprising. So it's not death itself is very easily accepted in India. I can assure that, but an astrologer's comment on a specific thing like this or a sensitive thing like this, it's not really taken well by the clients in India.
Okay,
So
that's good to
I
know.
yeah, so I know that from my own personal experience as an astrologer for more than a decade, and I know how many people have written emails to me, especially you know before 6 or 7 years when I was very active on Quora. People kind of write just to kind of gain clients and do this fear mongering kind of thing.
Sure.
So yeah, and that is very prevalent, not just in India but in many parts of the world as well.
Well, the
Uh,
other thing I want to say to that, related to that, and it's not just culturally specific or country specific or state
yeah,
specific. I
yeah,
think it's also, this is why consulting skills is important as a tie-in related to ethics. One thing to understand, when Isar introduced this, the consulting skills aspects of it, and then also ethics awareness, it was revolutionary. It did change the game. And this is before OPA introduced what they have now, which is stellar. And I don't know if NCGR, in fact, I'm pretty sure, didn't have that kind of training. So this is why consulting skills becomes very important, tied to ethics, how you say things, because clients will hear also and filter some measure of what the astrologer says through their lens. You could say, well, it could be a difficult time, especially with your job, during these particular months. And then they report to someone else like, oh, he said I'm going to lose my job. Not what I said,
yeah, yeah.
right? But this is
Problem
what they
communication.
heard.
Yeah, people perceive in a very different way and communicate in a very different way, and what astrologer said may not be I mean it's probably lost. So
Right.
so yeah, so that is another problem. So so uh, I'm just trying to see if there are any other things that we need to discuss. uh
And just to be clear, because I don't know if we've
yeah,
said it explicitly, you mentioned the three components.
yes.
Um, for CAPISAR, you have ethics awareness training,
Hmm.
which is I I don't know how long it is online, but I think it was 5-6 hours, maybe it's 3 hours. I don't exactly remember. But it's not days long, like consulting skills. So ethics awareness goes with a training and some discussion, and you take an exam. And the exam is basically to make sure you heard correctly what was said, and you
Right.
can, answer it. And most of it is true or false or particular things.
Hmm.
And then it is graded. And you can pass or you can fail.
A
And
lot of
then,
this is online today, so
okay,
maybe
yeah,
it's a lot more different. than what it was earlier.
That
So
could be true. And then the other consulting skills is 2.5 days. I think it definitely is online now, but you also can have it in person. So you can do it from the comfort of your own home. There is no exam. It's just basically um you do it, and then you get some measure of certification related to it. You're not a CAP, but that you completed consulting skills. It's when you do the competency and have finished the other two components, then that you have completed your CAP. Now, can you do the competency first and then do the other two? Sure. You could.
so I think one thing we have to talk about is the elective courses.
Okay.
So elective courses, can you just throw some light on those elective courses which needs to be from an ESAR affiliated school?
Yeah, I think that's tightened,
Hmm.
which is probably a good idea. Um, you you have to kind of the reason why it's an ESAR affiliated school is that you have to demonstrate that you've gone through a course, not just a class. So,
Hmm.
for instance, well, I took an ESAR Star Club with Nina Griffin, and we learned about horary. So now I have that as an elective. No, no, you don't. You didn't finish. You just took a class from one astrologer um, that doesn't cover the full swath of horary astrology, and I know Nina would agree. Um, so it's more so that you have to, have gone through the rigor of a course. STA, School for Traditional Astrology in England with Deborah Holding, or you've kind of gone through Nightlight Astrology, or you've gone through Pam Gallagher's school, or you've gone through International Academy of Astrology. Um, Now, I don't know if those are affiliated schools anymore.
I know, yeah. But for affiliated schools, there is a list on ESAR's website or
Mhm.
CAPISAR's website where people can go and check out. Uh, but three elective courses are must along with the major three elements that we spoke about. And I think that pretty much brings us towards the end of this discussion. Uh, so where can people find your work, about your work, and also what are your future projects that you can possibly share?
Yeah, so you can find out more about me and my work at unlockastrology.com, all one word. I am on social media. On Instagram, I am S as in Sam, F as in Fred, Reynolds, SF Reynolds. On Twitter, I'm still on Twitter. Unlock Astrology. Um, on Facebook, it's also SF Reynolds, but also Ebony Sky Talker is the one I use. You can do Unlock Astrology at YouTube and also access, the YouTubes I put up. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads. On Blue Sky, Unlock Astrology, and then the same SF Reynolds on Threads. And what I have coming up is that July 4th, I'm going to be talking about cadent houses at the Astrologer's Den out of British Columbia. So that's July 4th. And then in September, I'm going to be part of the Kepler Symposium. So
Great.
I'm going to be giving a course, a course that could account for credit if you're with Kepler on techniques of the sun, so solar returns and perfections, tying those together.
Amazing.
And then I'm part of UAC. When we open up registration in August,
The next big thing.
the next big thing in Chicago in September of 26.
Right.
So those are the big things in the immediate future. I'm sure there's other things percolating. Got to get to a book I'm finishing. Yeah,
That's something that I will look forward to.
inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. So yeah, I think that's it. So thanks very much, Samuel Reynolds,
Yeah,
for
thank you.
joining, and yeah, it's been great. and I'm sure people will check out your work. And thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.